Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our 78th episode of the Clements Bookworm. I'm Angela Unk, Director of Development at the Clements Library. Today's meeting is being recorded to share online, and this afternoon you will receive an email with the recording and resources mentioned during today's broadcast. Just in case you're joining us for the first time, I will mention that we like to use the chat and we'll paste things in all along. My colleague Ann Bennington-Helber and Katie Jade will be monitoring the chat. You are welcome to participate in those conversations. If you would be so kind, please change your setting to everyone so that everyone can see what you're putting in there. However, because there's a lot of activity in the chat, make sure that you put your questions in the Q&A section. And you can also see the questions that other people have. You can upvote if it's a question you have. And so just that helps to keep them all together. We do have the live machine captions turned on, and so you can toggle those on or off or change the size as you would like. And then play around with your screen because I can only control so much of what you see. You should be able to move the separator and change the relative size of the speaker and the slides. This program is brought to you by the William L. Clements Library, located on the campus of the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. The Clements Library's mission is to collect, preserve, share, and promote the study and discussion of primary related to all aspects of history and culture of North America and the Caribbean to about 1900. I'd also like to acknowledge that the University of Michigan is located on the territory of the Anishinaabe people. In 1817, the Chippewa, Ottawa, and Potawatomi nations made the largest single land donation to the University of Michigan, offered in ceremonially as a gift in the text of the Treaty of the Foot of the Rapids, so that their children could be educated in a Western manner. We acknowledge the history of Native displacement that allowed the University of Michigan to be founded. Today, we also reaffirm contemporary and ancestral Anishinaabe ties to this land and their profound contributions to this institution. And of course, the William L. Clements Library acknowledges that it has and continues to benefit from the original land dispossession and established hierarchies of settler colonialism. All right, friends, if you haven't had a chance yet to click on the poll, do it quickly, super fast. And I will end it and share the results. Oh, right, great. So, you know, we were talking a little bit about what British Army soldiers were called, and so they were referred to as the regulars, but also the colonialists used lobsterbacks as a pejorative, and so you know, those are the two answers. The other two refer to you know, the government. And then this one's a little bit tricky because we kind of forget how long we fought the Revolutionary War. And so the correct answer is 1783 for the Treaty of Paris that ended the war. All right, stop sharing. Today's episode is sponsored by the Alumni Association of the University of Michigan, and we thank you very much for your partnership. It's wonderful to have your support and partnership in this. And now it's my great pleasure to welcome my colleague, Clements Curator of Manuscripts, Cheney Schopieray, to the program. Cheney began working in the Manuscripts division of the Clements Library in 2002. He obtained his MSI degree from the University of Michigan School of Information in 2009 with a specialization in archives and records management. He became assistant curator of manuscripts then in 2009 and curator of manuscripts in 2013. In commemoration of the 250th anniversary of the start of the military conflict of the American Revolution, he has curated a new exhibition at the Clements Library, Bloody Work, Lexington and Concord, 1775. In today's presentation, he will explore these stories behind the materials and what they reveal about the dramatic opening moments of the hostilities of the American Revolution. So Cheney, welcome.
Great, thank you. I'm going to see if I can manage to share my screen quickly and efficiently. Wonderful.
All right, looks good. Thank you.
Great. Excellent. Well, thank you everyone who's in attendance today. I'm absolutely delighted to be here to talk about Lexington and Concord in the early months of 1775, and also and especially about some of the manuscript materials that that help us understand now the activities and that and the people that were part of this moment that began a nearly 8-year Revolutionary War 250 years ago. I'd also like to thank Dr. Gary Milan, who's contributed some of the pieces from his collection for this exhibition. Some of these are materials that have not been on display previously, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. So in the evening of April 18th of 1775, General Thomas Gage, who was commander of the British Army in North America, ordered a detachment of some 840 elite soldiers to march out of Boston with the utmost expedition and secrecy. Their mission was to travel some 17 miles northwest to Concord, where they were to destroy arms and ammunition, provisions, and military supplies that were stockpiled there by American colonists. Between about 10 p.m. and midnight, 250 years ago tonight, British Army officer Lieutenant Colonel Francis Smith led the soldiers out of Boston across the river to land on the mainland, and their movements set in motion a network of American rebels communications networks, including alarm riders Paul Revere and William Dawes, and Samuel Prescott, to notify the countryside. Over the course of April 19th, as they made their way, the British troops confronted armed resistance by American militiamen at Lexington, sparking the first gunfire of the American Revolution. At Concord, Lieutenant Colonel Smith's forces destroyed what remained of the stockpiled military stores there, and they clashed with colonial militiamen. The return to Boston was a long and bloody gauntlet for the Redcoats, despite the arrival of over 1,000 reinforcements. The increasing number of provincial militiamen that were arriving from distant towns and farms, gave incessant fire from behind trees and stone walls, barns, and from inside buildings. And by the time the expedition made it back to the safety of the city, some 73 British Army soldiers were dead or dying, 174 were wounded, and dozens were missing. And meanwhile, the provincials counted 49 dead or dying men, 39 wounded, and 5 missing. Following the violence was a flurry of intelligence gathering by opposing belligerents, distribution of news and propaganda to shape public opinion and then ultimately the resolutions and proclamations that were irreconcilable between the Massachusetts Provincial Congress and the royal government. So this is the set of events that occurred on April 18th and 19th and following that comprise the center of the exhibition that I've put together on the subject matter. You know, in putting together the exhibit, trying to find the appropriate scope was a challenge because the desire to include broad swaths of information about the causes and the development of ideologies and the local issues that ultimately in Massachusetts culminated in Lexington and Concord. I say culminated, that resulted in Lexington and Concord. You know, we have 4 exhibit cases and limited time. So what I tried to do is focus specifically on the early months of 1775. So why at the Clements Library? Many of you know of the Clements Library, have studied here. For those who don't or haven't, welcome. It's an absolutely magnificent collection of early Americana. And one of the reasons that we're particularly suited for an exhibition on Lexington and Concord is because of the man depicted in the center here, General Thomas Gage. And flanking him in this image are his handwritten draft for the orders, as well as some intelligence, all on the same document. And on the right, a secretarial retained copy of the final order given to Lieutenant Colonel Francis Smith. Incidentally, he's wearing a blue coat in this marvelous miniature by Jeremiah, Meyer. The blue coat is from 1785 to 87 when he was a commander in a light dragoon regiment, so post-American Revolutionary War service. The Gage papers, the papers of Thomas Gage, of over 23,000 letters and documents and any manner of paperwork you can quite imagine, are in Ann Arbor at the William Clements Library at the University of Michigan. Thomas Gage, they cover largely the part of Thomas Gage's career between 1763 and the outbreak of the Revolution in 1775. But a quick review will show that he had been in military service for the British from the 1740s all the way up until his death in 1787. An extraordinarily long career, much of it spent in America. The orders for the Concord expedition were not known until the papers of Thomas Gage were uncovered, acquired by Mr. Clements in 1930, and brought to the United States. This on the left is a from a scan of a newspaper from 1931, an article written by our first director, Randolph Adams, in which this is sort of the first publication of these of the orders after the arrival of the papers. Were in newspaper and in pamphlet form. And then one of the first researchers to make use of them, he had actually seen them in London previously, was Alan French, a historian and author of children's books. He wrote a rather fine book called General Gage's Informers, published in 1932, just 2 years after the papers arrived in Michigan. So, to the exhibit. I opened the exhibit with several pieces to provide context for the remainder of the exhibit, and that includes getting acclimated to the space through cartographic materials, as well as some of the social, governmental, and political elements that aren't going to be as much part of this presentation, but are part of the exhibit. This is a map by Isaac da Costa, done in 1775. It's the first printed map that depicts the battles of Lexington and Concord, as well, Bunker Breed's Hill is on here, I believe, as well. And we can see in the map, Boston at the time was a peninsula. And looking quite dissimilar from the way that it does now. And this will have an effect on the way that troop movements occur, in which people move in and out of the city. Phipps Farm, you'll see up and across the water. Phipps Farm across the water from Boston there is the place where the British troops landed when they left Boston around midnight, April 18th, 19th. So keep that in mind. And then up to the left of the map, we see Concord, we see Lexington, we see the soldiers, the regular army soldiers and militiamen fighting each other. We see Colonel Smith's return from Concord back to Boston, as well as Lord Percy, who was in charge of reinforcements. And more near Concord, we see piles of destroyed armaments and military supplies. But the exhibit proper begins February 9th of 1775. This is when Parliament addresses the King and indicates that Massachusetts Bay, the province of Massachusetts Bay, is in rebellion. This is the result of a series of events that had occurred in the half a year to 8 months or so before, after the Boston Tea Party in December of 1773. The Parliament passed a series of acts, the coercive acts, known in the colonies as the Intolerable Acts. Among them was the closing down of Boston Harbor until the destroyed tea was paid for. There's changes. There's parts of there's a quartering act. There's some issues related to. There's an act related to the implementation of justice and more. In response to those acts, a couple of things happened. The Massachusetts Provincial Congress became sort of a de facto government became the government outside of Boston, where royal government still presided. And the first Continental Congress took place in the fall of 1774, which was a meeting of multiple colonies on the issues related to the Intolerable Acts. So, in short, Parliament has proclaimed Massachusetts Bay in open rebellion in February. I can't walk through every item in the exhibit because we would be here for quite a long time, but I'd like to walk through and introduce you to a few of them. This is a letter of John Hancock in his handwriting, and it's written to Celia Boyle, the wife of his aide, John Boyle, on April 8th of 1775. One of the things I wanted to accomplish in this exhibit was to really focus on the everyday humanity of the individuals involved. When we think of John Hancock, when we think of Samuel Adams, we have these larger-than-life pictures of individuals, but they're also human beings with all of the various things that go along with being a human, and that includes practicalities relating to if you're a person who is not welcome by the British government, you're staying out of Boston, you need to help, you need to get your belongings moved. And so this letter is John Hancock writing to the wife of his aide, seeing about his fiance's trunk being moved out of Boston. He gives specifics for that. Dolly or Dorothy Quincy was his fiance, and this is the note that he sends. He's asking her to put all of Dolly's belongings into a trunk, and the key is being sent, and also refers to the purple gown that she'd like to have out of town. And these practical, everyday sort of experiences sort of bring you closer to that moment when people are evacuating Boston in anticipation amidst the tense political environment, the fear of violence, the anticipation, getting out of Boston. Or if you are what would later be called loyalists, if you're not part of provincial rebellion, you are headed to Boston, and that requires very practical efforts. Another piece in the exhibit is a letter from Jonathan Hosmer. He was a deacon in Acton, Massachusetts, and he's writing to, he addresses specifically his, sorry, excuse me. I was just reading the letter because I'd forgotten a piece of it, but he's writing to, he's addressing his children, which is apparently Oliver Stevens, his son-in-law, and his daughter Sarah, who had married Oliver, on April 10th of 1775. And this is the letter from whence the title of the exhibit came, because I think that this balance between, or not balance is the wrong word, but this sort of simultaneous living of everyday life amidst turmoil is something that you read over and over in letters from in and around Boston at this time. Move this. He writes, after my love to you all, I would inform you that I am better at present. So well, I went to meeting the 9th of April, my birthday. The day before was his birthday, and describes the health and wellness of their family, sicknesses, and so on. The sorts of things that you would write in an everyday letter. And then adds, as for news, we daily expect a tumult. There came up a post to Concord a Saturday night, which informs them that the regulars are coming up to Concord the next day. He's referring to a false alarm ride of Paul Revere's. But if they do come, if the regulars do come up to Concord, I believe there will be bloody work, and I must be short. Incidentally, Jonathan Hosmer's son dies at Concord, and he's on the list of casualties in one of the exhibits or one of the items in the exhibition. This is again, the physical objects are exceedingly important. We collect the original materials at the Clements Library, and there's a reason for that. And in this letter that's on loan from Dr. Milan in memory of Joyce Kleiger, we see the folds of the letter. We see this is the address on the outside of it. You notice, of course, that there's no postal markings. This is something that's being carried by hand. And it's headed up to New Hampshire, where his daughter and stepson live. We'll leap ahead. So we have a January 27th letter, which seems earlier than the others, but I've included it for a very particular reason. This is a letter that's written by William Legge, the second Earl of Dartmouth, to Thomas Gage. In this letter, which is marked secret in the upper left, you find it's a, I don't know, I have a hard time reading it because it's I actually feel uncomfortable with the sort of almost it's the upset tone, I think. So at this time, Gage had already written in the fall saying that he needed about 20,000 men if it became necessary to use force against Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. He had about 4,000 troops in Boston. This is the response, and I'm just going to read a couple of short passages from it. It's a very long letter for reasons I'll explain. Begins, I have stated that the violences committed by those who have taken up arms in Massachusetts Bay have appeared to me as the acts of a rude rabble without a plan, without concert, and without conduct, and therefore I think that a smaller force now, if put to the test, would be able to encounter them with greater probability of success than might be expected from a greater army. Instead, Dartmouth recommends very, very strongly that that Gage arrest the principal actors and abettors in the provincial Congress, and to keep it a secret. I quote, "Any efforts of the people unprepared to encounter with a regular force cannot be very formidable. And though such a proceeding should be, according to your own idea of it, a signal for hostilities, yet for the reasons I have already given, it will surely be better that the conflict should be brought on upon such ground than in a riper state of rebellion." And lastly, addressing concerns that certainly Gage had was the legality of using force, because Gage had been very reticent to use the army in any way against the to use the army for forcibly and doing what he was sent out to do, which was enforce the intolerable acts. He needed legal justification to do so, and it's this letter that Dartmouth explains that. It says, "In reviewing the charter for the government of the province of Massachusetts Bay, I observe there is a clause that empowers the governor to use and exercise the law martial in time of actual war, invasion, or rebellion," which is underlined. Now, this is the Parliament's very unhappy with Gage. There'd been open talk of having him replaced, thinking that he was not doing enough to settle the rabble in Massachusetts. What's significant about this and why it's in the exhibit is it's one of the two copies of this that were made and sent to Gage. This one, on the docket, we can read that it arrived in Gage's hands on April 16th. There was another one that arrived on the 14th. This one on the sloop of war Falcon. It takes a while for the movement of information over the ocean. And so this one in particular, January 27th, the Falcon didn't end up leaving until mid-February. and then didn't arrive to Gage until April 16th. And there's an awful lot that can happen in the meantime. And it also goes to show some of the disconnect between Parliament and what it believes is going on in the province, in the colony versus what's happening on a daily basis. In this remarkable letter, this is written 250 years ago today. Again, borrowed from the collection of Dr. Milan. This is written at 9 o'clock in the evening from John Hancock in Lexington to a fellow Committee of Safety member, Elbridge Gerry. And he writes, "I am much obliged for your notice. It is said the officers are gone to Concord Road, and word I will send word hither." It says word twice because one of these should be stricken out as in the original manuscript. "I will send word thither. I am full with you that we ought to be serious, and I hope your decisions will be effectual. I intend doing myself the pleasure of being with you tomorrow." So in Lexington, Hancock is informing Gerry about some of the British patrols that are out trying to intercept riders that may be going into or coming out of Boston with information. For Gage's best efforts, he rather bungled the very important aspect of secrecy, in that sending out troops to try and make sure that that information make sure that information didn't get out was itself indicative of plans being underway. So, excuse me. Yes, 9 o'clock in the evening. I have much to say about that letter, but I don't have time. So that brings us to Gage's draft orders. On the left is a portrait of Thomas Gage at Yale. On the right of Lieutenant Colonel Francis Smith. Both of them much earlier than the American Revolutionary period, but both magnificent portraits. So the draft. The draft starts about midway down the page, and it's a fascinating picture of the thought processes that are going through Thomas Gage's head at this time. It's unfiltered. It's him. He's actually probably sitting down with a couple of pieces of intelligence that relate to some of the content. But he writes, "Sir, you will march with the Corps of Grenadiers and Light Infantry, put under your command with the utmost expedition and secrecy to Concord, and where you will seize and destroy all the artillery and ammunition you can find." But he goes back and adds insertions such as, "Sir, a quantity of ammunition and provision, together a number of cannon and small arms having been collected at Concord for the avowed purpose of supporting a rebellion against His Majesty's government, you will march with the Corps." Or he came back and in multiple places added provisions and tents to the things to be destroyed by the troops heading out. In the first case, it's clear that at some point he went back and decided that it was important to include an explanation of why it is that these troops are being sent out. Furthermore, these being manuscript materials, and being in the hand of Gage, you also get this sense of his physical person as he's sitting down to the page. Writing is a product of the anatomy, the physiology of the human that's putting it on paper. It's the product of their training. It's a product of their education, as well as where they're sitting, what types of writing implements they have, and so on. So manuscripts can bring you about as close to sitting beside this person across a period of 200 years that you could get to. So if we look at this, we can see where he's using a quill pen, so he has to dip it into an inkwell. He's writing quickly, and you can see in the word rebellion there where the ink he's started to run out of ink in the quill and has to re-dip the pen. You can see places where you have scratches that can be pieces of either broken quill or a slipped point on the quill pen that cause splatters and blots, which are present throughout this. You can see him pressing harder and not, and in that way, these types of materials, which are so often difficult to look at in an exhibition, because they're text and they're hard to read often to a viewer, and it takes more time to do so. This is the final retained draft, or the final retained, this is the secretarial copy of the retained draft, oh my heavens. This is of the final order that went out to Lieutenant Colonel Smith. And we can see, having received intelligence that a quantity of ammunition, provision, artillery, etc., is much cleaned up language. It also includes the addition of the line, but you will take care that the soldiers do not plunder the inhabitants or hurt private property. He mentions a draft of Concord on which is marked the houses, barns, etc., which contain the above military stores. We can talk more about that today. On the second page of the retained copy, I wanted just to mention that when you use printed source materials, you're relying on all sorts of things out of your control. How quickly someone was transcribing them, and the legibility of the writing. This is one word that shows up in error in many places when people quote or provide a transcription of Gage's orders to Smith, is in this last line. It's typically what you'll see is you will open your business and return with the troops as soon as possible, which I must leave to your own judgment and discretion. And it does look like the word open if you're reading, if you're reading this. It's a very sloppily written sort of word. It's written in haste, but it's also a matter of pushing a quill pen into paper can result in different results than you intend. So let's take a look at that word. We can look closely. Many of you who may have a lot of experience working with English roundhand will recognize the word. Like Mary Beth Norton's book includes a transcription that's, has the accurate word, but most of them that I see, it's not. It says, they mostly say open. But if we look at the P's and we look at the way that the connectors move into the letter, we see the upstroke, downstroke, and around and down, which looks decidedly different than a P. Similarly, if we look at on the left, we look at the P, and when on the downstroke, when they come back up from the left, but on F's, they do from the right. They also, like in the manuscript, the pen pulls to the left. It's actually the word affect. So you will effect your business and return with the troops as soon as possible, etc., etc. Sometimes doing your own transcriptions can be very interesting. I use other people's to help me where I've made mistakes. And sometimes you stumble across things like that as well. The reinforcements sent out, that's Percy's draft to Thomas Gage, or Thomas Gage's draft to Lord Percy to head out and provide reinforcements on the 19th. And I'd like to provide a quotation from the piece on the right, which is borrowed. I'm not going to read that. I don't know why I pasted that on there. It looks very dramatic and long. But it's so easy to go back and look at these events and in these sort of grand and simplified ways. And when someone is immediately afterwards, somebody who's been part of that conflict, somebody who's dealt with the trauma of being in an active participant in military violence, you can really get a better picture of the sort of chaos that that is part of that experience. So this is an officer from the one of the regiments of foot that served under Percy in the relief effort. I'm going to quote this again. A reading of the entire piece is on the online version of the website, or online version of the exhibit. I had the honor to command the major's company all the day, and as everything was in the greatest confusion and no kind of order given how we should conduct ourselves, I was my own commanding officer, and soon cleared the house I went up to and then set fire to it. I kept on the flank for about 6 miles and then came in, and was so lucky as to have only 1 man of the company killed and 3 wounded. And from that time there was not a single house on the road but what was full of people to intercept us, and all the walls lined from which they fired on us under cover until the houses were surrounded and every one of them put to death. You cannot conceive how desperate they were, for after we were in the very room with them and they had quarter offered, they would fight it out to the very last man. And during the whole day I heard but 1 man ask for quarter, and he had his thigh broke. The reason of the houses being so full of people was their hearing that we were defeated, and they conceived that we never would stop to dislodge them, but run past as fast as we were able, and then they might fire on us until we were out of reach without being in any danger themselves. But when they found themselves surrounded, they grew desperate and fired to the last, and there never was any set of men behaved with greater courage than the soldiers. Their officers could not restrain them. They dashed into every danger, and when they had dislodged the enemy, they straggled into the main body by 3 and 4 at a time without the least order, and threw everything into confusion. In short, everybody did as they pleased. Some ran this way, some that way, wherever there was any opposition. And for the last 10 miles, you could neither find out your regiment, company colors, or anything else. And you would see nowhere more than 6 or 8 men of any regiment together, all mixed and interspersed as if they'd been shook out of a bag. Wherever an officer run out to clear any place, he had 100 at his heels, not of his own men, but of a dozen different regiments in one of those sallies. I had a very narrow escape, having a grenadier of the 5th, a soldier of ours, and a Marine killed all around me. But we soon got into the house, and I counted 11 Yankees dead in it, and the orchard. One villain had 73 balls in his bag and 2 horns of powder. Before we fell into confusion, when Hamilton and I, with Captain Holmes and the Major's company, were on the flanks driving them out, some of the Underwood, the grenadiers of the 47th Regiment, mistaking us for Yankees, were absolutely on the present to fire at us. And when Ben Fish of ours knocked up their pieces and told them they were firing on their own men, such a scene of confusion never was. And I saw several men killed by our own people firing on them from eagerness. And you would see a party of soldiers firing at the front of a house and another in its rear, whilst the main body were pelting away at the upper windows, by which means many of our own people fell even after they were in the house. And all the world could not prevent it. One soldier of ours got 7 balls in him by that means, 4 of which have been cut out, and he's still alive. And in this manner, we retreated to Charlestown. On the left, also in the exhibit, immediately following the conflict, as the wounds that are being treated, as information is being gathered, Patriot Sons of Liberty member and very well connected and well respected Dr. Benjamin Church was given permission to come and go from Boston in the morning once a day, when after Gage immediately shut down Boston. Nobody comes in, nobody goes out. Dr. Church, though, was providing information to Gage as one of the very first sort of traitors to the Patriot cause. On the left is a bundle of papers that I put together of things that he collected from the Quincy's. It's including letters from Edmund Quincy to John Hancock and others, as well on top this letter from Rachel Revere. Incidentally, the letter on the right, one of them also references that that Dolly's trunk had not made it out of Boston yet. This letter from Rachel Revere to her husband, Paul Revere, suggests that he not come back to Boston, and provides 125 pounds enclosed in the letter for his benefit. She has the children and hopes that she can send them out to him, and that yes, I'm gonna move quickly. That's the address sheet on the verso of that document. Also showing the fold marks, passed as a note. Ultimately, in the exhibit, you'll also see the collection of lists of the casualties and newspapers showing the transmission of what happened on April 19th to areas surrounding, first to areas in New Hampshire and in Rhode Island and Connecticut, and then to New Jersey and to Virginia and North Carolina, is the sort of progression of the news spreading. When the Massachusetts Provincial Congress meets thereafter, this printed document, this is in the exhibit, is their declaration that, or their resolution that the said General Gage hath by these and many other means utterly disqualified himself to serve this colony as a governor and in every other capacity, and that no obedience ought in future to be paid by the several towns and districts in this colony to his writs for calling an assembly, or to his proclamations, or any other of his acts and doings. But that on the other hand, he ought to be considered and guarded against as an unnatural and inveterate enemy to the country. Following is this very large, I left the measuring device in there to show the size of this broadside printing. This is Gage's copy of his proclamation that is it's actually, he's very upset, but it's the one in which he declares martial law on June 12th of 1775. And he explains why, and he describes the Lexington and Concord from the perspective of one of the highest level administrator, a British royal government administrator in the colonies, as well as the head of the military and the governor of province of Massachusetts Bay. I wish that I could read all of this to you, but I can't, because there is, you must read this or listen to it. It's on the online version of the website. I will note at the end, though, he notes that I do hereby in His Majesty's name offer and promise his most gracious pardon to all persons who shall forthwith lay down their arms and return to the duties of peaceable subjects, accepting only from the benefit of such pardon Samuel Adams and John Hancock, whose offenses are of too flagitious a nature to admit of any other consideration than that of condign punishment. The pieces that are on exhibit, there are 25 in the physical exhibit, and the online version will grow over the coming weeks. There are some things I'd like to add to it. This picture shows some of the pieces that are not in there. The copy of Mercy Otis Warren's play, The Group, is in the physical exhibit, but others are not. We have a great deal of material on this, and we anticipate much in the coming 250th anniversary of events over the next nearly 8 years of the Revolutionary conflict. So I think I'll almost end with that, although I would like to add, in talking to different news reporters and others about the exhibit, I get several questions. One of the questions that's often asked is trying to somehow relate the events and the situations of Lexington and Concord in the province of Massachusetts Bay in 1775 to the present and some of the present tumultuous environment that we're in, socially, politically, and otherwise. And what I always do is just bring it back to the exhibit, because the past is not the present, and we cannot quite ever understand what it's like to have actually been in the shoes of someone like Jonathan Hosmer or others. But when we read these letters, when we read the manuscripts in their own words, and we look at those words on the page, those fears, those sorts of experiences of anticipation and anger, and all of the things that a human being can feel sound remarkably similar, though the language that they use, the words obviously are, even when they're the same words, probably meant something just a hair different back then. So, I always have to sidestep it as a result, because I'm not qualified to comment on that. But in case anybody here was intending to ask about the present, there's a lot of different ways we can talk about it. But for this purpose, for the exhibit, I've been avoiding that in the news. So.
All right. Thank you so much, Cheney. That was amazing. And I will just do a couple of announcements, and then we'll get to the questions. So as a reminder, put your questions in the Q&A section of the webinar, and then we'll work on those. So we've mentioned it a couple of times in the chat, but as you can tell, we're very excited that the exhibit opens today at noon. And so if you're in the area anytime between now and September 19th, you can view the exhibition in person from noon to 4. In addition, we do have some tour dates coming up, and so we'd love to take you on a tour of the Clements Library as well as the exhibit. And just in case you don't know, some of you have attended many of these programs, but our local donors, when we do exhibitions, we do have something that we call conversations with the curators, where people have the opportunity to view some of the things that didn't quite make the cut and just talk more specifically with the curator. So if you've thought about donating to the Clements and haven't yet, that maybe is something that you'll want to consider. All right. In addition, as part of thinking about the revolution, we have Rick Atkinson coming to campus to speak on May 13th. And his second book in his Revolution trilogy launches at the end of this month. The Fate of Day, The War for America, Fort Ticonderoga and Charleston, 1777 to 1780. And so he will be in conversation with Clements director Paul Erickson, and we're really looking forward to that. And it's a free program, and please feel free to register for that. Oh, here's the tour slide with some of those upcoming dates. And then next month, we continue talking about the Revolutionary War with our curator of maps and graphics, Sierra Ladisaw, and our adjunct curator of maps, Mary Pedley. We have some really jaw-dropping Revolutionary War maps in the Clements collections. And so anyone who has registered for the Bookworm receives a reminder next month, so you can join live again. Or, as I mentioned previously, we do send out to everyone who's registered a link to the recording and resources after the program. Today's episode is, once again, we just want to thank the Alumni Association of the University of Michigan for sponsoring today's episode. It's really a wonderful partnership. And if you happen to be interested in sponsoring future episodes of the Bookworm, you can always contact me, and I'm happy to talk about it. All right, let's get to the questions. I noticed that Tom had a couple of questions, Cheney, related to the arms, related to how much ammunition and arms did the Redcoats actually destroy? And also, did they really think that they were going to be able to disarm the Americans?
Yeah, actually, if it's all right, I'll just kind of walk through the questions from the top. Is that all right, Angela?
Well, I was combining that
Oh,
one because it
oh, yeah.
seemed like, yeah, those two went together.
Okay, yep. The specifics of what how many cannon, how much in the way of stores. I would have to look at some of my reference material for the exact numbers. There was some there, but and this was briefly alluded to in the Jonathan Hosmer letter, that there was a false alarm to Concord. I mean, that's where the provincial Congress was meeting. It's where those stockpiles were stored, and was being sort of moved out of the King's Storehouse at Boston surreptitiously by colonials, and added to that store there. In those weeks before that. So the false alarm, though, meant that that movement felt imminent. And so the decision was made to start trying to get all of that material out of Concord, so that when the, British regulars were sent out, it wouldn't be there. And so much of it had been removed. So there was still material there, but just not nearly as much as Gage's intelligence had suggested, because it didn't include that removal. Now the other part of it, though, about trying to disarm, one of the chief things that the provincials were lacking was gunpowder. And so one of the first things that, and this is just a couple of weeks-ish before, a few weeks before the Lexington and Concord, they actually start. I mean, actually, I shouldn't say that. It's after Lexington and Concord. There are instructions and orders to, start, how to make saltpeter, so they can start making, their own powder, because that was something they lacked. So, for Gage, who himself is a guy, he's been in America for, since the 1750s. He's got a spouse who's a colonial American woman. He has property and family and in-laws. He doesn't have that property and can't have that property in England. I mean, this is a place where he's at. So when he is giving orders to march west and seize those stores, one of the reasons why he's doing that is to try and prevent violence. Obviously, that whole effort was bungled pretty severely, on his part. But yeah, it's the lack of gunpowder is one of the biggest things, and getting rid of the big guns.
Thank you, Cheney. So Tom also asked, the tea of the Tea Party belonged to the private British East India Company. Why did the British government feel compelled to punish the people of Boston for its loss?
That's one of the like a longer sort of preceding question, but I guess a short answer is that it played into a variety of different sort of commercial related legislation that the colonists were not happy about Parliament delivering. So, the Tea Act that allowed the East India Company to move tea without tax, but taxing colonists for it was found to be problematic, especially since there's not representation of colonial leaders in those parliamentary discussions. So yeah, they had grievances that were more than just the I was going to say dollar signs, but the pound signs. So
So Carl has an interesting question. He says, here in Niagara Falls is buried a Jesse Ware who answered the Lexington call. Ware was from New Braintree, Worcester. Were there multiple Lexington calls? And where did those who answered the call after Lexington go? Where were they deployed?
Depended on the individuals. A lot of we're talking about thousands of militiamen from the neighboring communities coming together, like as Paul Revere and William Dawes, and then Samuel Prescott, and spread the alarm to other riders, and these networks keep expanding out. More and more of these militiamen start flocking to the scenes of action on the 19th. And by the time the troops get back to the British Army troops get back to Charleston and Boston, there's well over 10,000 of these guys, like outside the town, or the city of Boston. So lots of folks answered the Lexington call, and what the individuals did afterwards, the ones that survived, were as varied as the people who were there. Some of them certainly ended up joining the Continental Army under Washington in different capacities. Others continued to serve in different militia units, and I imagine much else. So, looking into that biography will be exciting about what that man did. I wish you luck on it.
So Miriam is wondering about recommendations of published books and articles that complement this exhibition.
The online exhibit as sort of this part of the exhibit opens today, so I got to turn my attention to getting sort of additional writing done to finalize a bulletin to go with it, as well as additional text for the website, and I'll include both a bibliography and recommended reading list there. If I offer recommendations, it's probably going to be the most enjoyable ones I've read recently. So, and so with Rick Atkinson's book coming out and him coming here, I very much enjoy his writing, but that's also on a very grand, that's also, his books are remarkable to read in their level of detail. But there are also, books that are recommended to me and that I find to be extremely compelling from a very local and minute level. We had mentioned, for example, I was reading a longer section of that letter from the officer in Percy's retreat, and that sort of chaos. And he describes the house full of bodies. That house, still stands, and there's been, recent publication on that, the Russell House, that that analyzes the like bullet holes that are still there. So that's minutia, but it's and so that sort of level of like scrutiny and detail is just extraordinary. So I mean, there's an awful lot, and I'll have a meaningful list together once I parse it out from what I'm reading right now and enjoying. So
Right. Yes. And I was saying that when Cheney and I were just getting ready and people were starting to come into the program, I started The British Are Coming by Rick Atkinson this week, which is fun to read as these events are taking place. And so, yeah, there are lots of books, but that if you haven't read that yet, maybe that's a place to start. Um, so then Tom is wondering, nobody from Boston participated in the attack on the Red Coat retreat. Why was Boston punished?
Um, I think that question, could that be reworded slightly? Oh,
Oops,
um,
sorry, I hit done.
oh, that's okay. I, because
Well,
some of
you
it
can,
I'd have to look in, some of it I'd have to look
right.
into, like after the troops, I don't know, I would have to look into that in more detail, I think, before I answered that question. So I'll have to come back to you
All
on that.
right.
Yeah.
And going back to the stores of military material, Peter's wondering how Gage became aware of that material.
Yeah, so Gage was actually rather well informed in the months preceding. The even back in 1774, there was stores that were seized from a different location, and then there was another planned expedition to seize stores, but the public outcry was so significant about the first round that that was canceled. And so, um, you know, now going back to early 75, people like, well, in early April anyway, Benjamin Church providing information. Before that, in March, he was receiving information from multiple different informers. There's an interesting group. There's two of them, and they're fascinating to me. They're in French, but a sort of not exactly proper French. There's some of the earlier historiography belittles the person who wrote it as being execrable French, um, which may or may not have been deliberate. So I'm not sure calling it that makes sense. But one of them, the one of March 9th, 1775, it's either a deposition or a piece of writing um, from an informer themselves, but it's basically the list of where those stores are located in Concord. Um, you know, Barrett's Farm, in this house, behind this place, there's 4 Cannon here, et cetera, et cetera. So Gage was working with some pretty detailed information. But again, sort of that information got sort of superseded by, actions that were taken to remove that material from that place.
Marianne has an interesting question. Did Gage have a fatal flaw in dealing with and understanding the sentiments of the local population?
I don't know about a fatal flaw. I think there is a disconnect. But on the other hand, I think he's also a lot. Um, I think he's more aware than he's in the past been given, credit for. Um, there are reasons why he was hesitant to use military force. Again, there's a reason why over the winter of 74, 75, he's sort of trying to keep as I've read in the past, trying to keep the top on a boiling kettle. It's a, he was actually thought you know, the reason he came into that position, so he actually leaves the Americas for the first time in ages, in um, in 1773 to go home for a little while to England, and he stays there a short period of time. And when the Massachusetts governor is leaving his office, um, their Gage accepts the position that is being vacated. And there's a belief that both on both sides of the Atlantic that he's the right sort of person for the job. And that quickly becomes not the case, because he's sent by Parliament to enforce these coercive acts. That's his directive. And trying to walk that line is not something that you can't do both. You can't keep a happy population at the same time as like your directive is to do exactly the thing that they don't want done. Um, so um, I think I think he was well aware of local sentiment, and of provincial sentiments and beliefs. They both used language of liberty, for example. Although, for Gage, he's a military hierarchical administrator that, liberty falls within the set of rules that are part of that world, and the idea of rejecting that in a way that's rebellious, like is being done, especially with violence. Just, I mean, it's, I don't know. I don't know if it's a fatal flaw with him. I can't imagine being in his position, personally. Um,
Right, definitely. I am sharing my screen for just a moment because I wanted to mention, I noticed Jackie in the chat was talking about, um, how many people have trouble reading handwriting because it's not something people do on a regular basis anymore. And I just wanted to point out that one of the things that we did with this exhibit that I think is really important is we have all of the transcriptions available. Cheney took time to do all of the transcriptions, but also we had them read beautifully. So there are two school music, theater, and dance students, Sarah Hartness and Leighton Allen, who provide those audio recordings, as well as one of the interns from the Clements, James Watke Stacy. And so when you're online here for the exhibit, when you go to this gallery of letters, not only can you see the writing, but then when you click, you can also listen to the whole transcription. And they really do a beautiful job of bringing it to life. Because I think one of the challenges with this exhibit is it's so amazing to think about people writing these letters and the movement of these letters. But then, you really need to be able to absorb the content of those letters too, to see the whole thing. So I just wanted to point that out to everybody. Okay, and there's a couple last questions and then we'll sign off. Tom is wondering, did anyone actually promote political independence from Britain at this time?
yeah, I am on. All right. Um, smaller portions, of very, very small portions of people, but they're these are the Samuel Adams, and for whom, because there's open talk about, with Parliament, with Gage, with, that this isn't like they're not gonna budge. Many of these people are pushing for independency. So yeah, at this time, that kind of thing is sort of floating around in the air, but it's you know, it's not an organized, you know, effort at that time. You know, it's I mean, they'd only just met at the Continental Congress, or at the First Continental Congress a few months earlier, and the second one, you know, that would start to, you know, become more of a matter of discussion after the violence of April 19th, and then, you know, Bunker Hill and that. So
All right. And Tom's last question, which I think is referencing some of the things that were talked about in Deborah Gage's presentation a couple of weeks ago. You know, he's wondering, well, to what extent does the British prohibition on settlement west of the Alleghenies provide a basis for resistance as well as taxes?
how long do we have for this one?
I know,
I
right?
would, you know, I keep wanting to like bring these back to the exhibit, and I'll say in
Yes.
case one, I've included an item that I'm very happy is in the exhibit, partly because it's a letter, and the writer himself describes it as a tedious letter. And it is a tedious letter. And then he apologizes and then continues to write for another 3 or 4 pages. It's a marvelous letter by Silas Deane of Connecticut. And he's writing to Patrick Henry of Virginia. And this is in January of 1775. I included it in the exhibit as one of a couple of pieces that were to provide some context for you know, the types of concerns and issues and conversations that are part of the public and private discourse at that time preceding Lexington and Concord. There's no way to provide a summary of Silas Deane's letter because it's long and tedious. But the frontier is part of that discussion. You know, in the 1763 proclamation line, you know, is something that you know, caused settlers continued to try and push past that. And there's ongoing conflict with indigenous nations, tribes that, for which, I mean, it was a continuing effort, which can, for the British government, also means expenditure of monies. So, you know, that is sort of one place where the people living on the, I say that like the Anglo-European and other peoples, colonists who lived on the frontier had more of a vested interest in having the support of a military in those environments. But by 1775, in the early months, there were a couple of different land cessions that, well, one that took place that included the Shawnee without their permission for a land in the west part of Virginia. And when they protested it, there was violence between colonists and them, and the land was then just taken. And so Silas Deane's letter, among other things, they're supporting Massachusetts is on the front page. So you can see that in the exhibit. They're supporting Massachusetts' resistance to the government. And in the letter, though, he's trying to convince Patrick Henry to use that land for trying to settle that land according to the New England model. And then he describes that in just excruciating detail. This is how the township should be laid out. This is how many families should go. This is how much acreage they should get. This is how much acreage the parsonage should get. This is what these people would be paid. They should ideally be all Protestants. They should, especially if they're separate, if they're I forget the word he used, but anyway, he lays out in very vivid detail. He talks about how they should be policed, how they should be. I mean, it's a very detailed explanation of that process on lands that were taken through force after a treaty that wasn't agreed to by the group that lived on it. So that's a really sort of scattered answer that is the tip of an iceberg of a much bigger discussion, I think.
Yes, but thank you. I mean, it at least touches on it a bit. So it is, there's a lot of information at the Clements Library in General Gage's papers because they're vast, and they continue to be one of our most accessed collections for research. And of course, as we continue to put them online, that project is finishing up. We expect that we'll see more writings and more researching, and there should be lots of interesting insights from that work. So thank you, everybody, for joining today's broadcast, and hopefully you'll have a chance to come to the library and see the exhibition in person. But if not, as we've mentioned, you do have the opportunity to see it online, and feel free to tell everyone you know about this program and about the exhibit. We love to spread the word about what it is we have here. So thank you, Cheney, and I hope everybody has a great weekend.
And thank you, everyone, for being here. And those of you in and around Concord and Lexington and outside of Boston, I both wish I was there and wish that I was, and I'm glad that I'm not there because of the crowds of people that I imagine are there in this environment. So, yeah, keep an eye on the exhibit online. It will continue to expand. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.